Hey, welcome to the Purple and Bold podcast from the Daily News Record and DNR Media. I'm Shane Metlin here with Catie Harper again, Talk JMU Sports, which there are a ton of going on right now because football really never ends. And we are um, kind of, I guess the offseason will actually slow down just a little bit. At least we thought. We thought the entire signing class was in place, and then got some more news yesterday. But we'll come back to that. We heard from Billy Napier this week and Jacob of France, who's in charge of the personnel side of things for the JMU football program. But let's start off with JMU basketball, which plenty to talk about there, both on the men's and women's side. For the women's team, good news of late. They've played well. They've really won. They were dominant at home against admittedly some not very good teams in Louisiana and South Alabama, but go and get a pretty solid road win. That they were, it got close in the third quarter at Southern Miss, but other than that, they were in control pretty much the whole way against a solid Southern Miss team, which they haven't been able to do on the road quite as much. So, as we know, they're going to be on the road here for a little while, including going to UMass for the MAC Challenge here on Sunday. I think probably an encouraging sign. Maybe that win at Southern Miss even more encouraging than just blowing the doors off of teams at home.
Yeah, it's the JMU women's team right now is looking like what we expected it to look like, a couple months ago, right? As the non-conference schedule was going on and then heading into the conference schedule. This is about what we expected out of this team. We expected them to be putting up these good scores and putting up good performances against these teams, regardless of where they are in the Sun Belt standing. So it is now you're seeing that this team is, turn the corner from what was a rough couple of weeks at times, but they're performing the way that I think preseason expectations had them performing. Players they're stepping up that they expect to step up. Ashanti Barnes has obviously had a great season. Peyton McDaniel is going to be Peyton McDaniel. So this team right now is kind of firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, and of late, other than the second half at Arkansas State, where they were dominant for a stretch against Arkansas State and ended up losing that game. They were up by 19 points, can't hang on to the lead in that one. But I mean, if you could get that one back and pull off a road win at Arkansas State, which they showed they were capable of doing, they didn't end up pulling it off. Then this recent stretch would look really good. And for the whole on the season, you'd probably be about where you'd expect, knowing the Sun Belt was going to be tougher this year. I think JMU still sits in fifth place, but they're really knocking on the door, getting that fourth place spot, which would mean a bye all the way to the quarterfinals in the conference tournament. Which, we've talked a ton about the conference tournament format. I'm sure we'll talk more here in the coming weeks as we get closer and closer to Pensacola and how that bracket's set up. But a reminder for people: if you're in the top four, you start in the quarterfinal round. If you're in the top two, you start in a semifinal round. And I think there are people who believe that top four spot is even kind of the sweet spot because you get a game, a very winnable game, not necessarily guaranteed, but you play a lower seeded team and get used to the arena, get used to the tournament, after a long break. At least on the men's side, the teams that had that long break and played in the semifinal round against a good team, they struggled last year in the new format. So, I think a top four seed would be almost ideal for JMU on the women's side.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's obviously, like you said, it's still very much within reach. And as we've seen it play out, that top four, top two seed, that it is the sweet spot. You want to be somewhere in that group. You do not want to be going into this tournament having to play multiple games and kind of burn yourself out a little bit before you get to the top teams in the conference. And JMU certainly is a top team in the conference. Just had some, bad stretches there, but I think this team is very much capable of securing that top four spot. Um, I don't think they're gonna, if they get far enough up to where they could be a top two, I don't think they're gonna just, relax and hang out in that sweet spot of a top four. But group's really good, and I think it is weird just like comparing it. And I know we'll talk about men's basketball, but comparing it to the two teams and how one has turned it around and been a little bit more consistent now, while one is still, winning one game, losing the other. And it's definitely a weird time in the AUBC with consistency, but at least on the women's side, it's all seeming to come together right now.
Yeah, and like you said, we will talk about the men's and what leads to winning on the men's side, and but it's the same conversation to a degree. The reason the JMU women are able to kind of gather themselves, kind of like get back after a rough stretch, I think it has a lot to do with the continuity of the roster. And there was some turnover. They're playing new players in some important spots, but you've got 4 starters who were very key pieces last year, including all conference players. You've got another piece off the bench, Angela Williams, who plays significant minutes and knows the system, knows what's going on. It has improved. So you've got that continuity, which, like I said, we'll talk more about the men's side, but look at who's on top of the men's side. It's Troy. They've got a similar roster makeup where they brought back their top 5-6 players from, not their top 5 or 6 players of last year, but their top 5 or 6 players this year are back from last year. And that seems to make a huge difference. But Jamie's not alone in that on the women's side, which I think is the difference. In the reason why the Deuce can play pretty well. They can beat really good teams in a non-conference and still be, still have to work to get that top 4 spot.
Yeah, it is. This is like this season, especially, is the prime example of how much having continuity on a basketball roster, how important that is. And you're seeing it play out. And I feel like we've harped on it every week now. When you're looking at it, it really is. If anybody has ever doubted how much knowing the players beside you and knowing the system, how important that is, you look at the JMU women's team right now, and I think that is a clear and true sign of how important it is to have that continuity. And of course, even, yes, they've all come back for several years, but it's an older team as well. So I feel like there is that trust that Sean O'Regan has with them, that if things aren't going right for them, they're old enough to know, and he's been around them enough to know that, hey, they're going to figure it out. So it's that continuity of having the same teammates for a long time, but also just the experience of playing the college game, that I think there is just that really strong level of trust that the head coach knows that they'll figure it out.
Yeah, and Sean doesn't want to be sitting in 5th right now. That's a given. He's very competitive. He wants to win, but he also knows that this team has to win in Pensacola. The regular season title is nice. They love it. They want it, but I think it's more the main goal is to get back to the NCAA tournament, and to do that, they're going to have to win the conference tournament. And I think he's let them play through some situations this year where maybe it wasn't the best decision for winning that game, but it might be the best situation for winning in Pensacola later on, like not calling a timeout or not making a substitution when the other team's on a run. And we'll see how that ends up playing out. But I think that's something he's done with this team. It's something he feels like he can do because he's got players like Peyton McDaniel, Shanti Barnes, Bree Robinson back from last year.
And it's almost like something that they have to do this year too, because, for the last several years, it has so much been that this team, you can kind of tell that the JMU program is a few steps ahead of some of the other teams in the Sun Belt. Obviously, you have, like, a couple of years ago, you have a really good Marshall team that can play them really well. And you have other, like, a team or two that kind of matches up to them. But you look at some of these seasons that they roll through the Sun Belt during the regular season at times. So there isn't too much of an opportunity to let them play through those hard moments and let them kind of learn from it. So it's almost like it has to be done this year because of kind of the situation that they're in, with it being a very competitive conference now after a few years of it kind of just being 1 or 2 teams at the top.
Yeah, and we've talked about it before. The JMU's not alone in their roster makeup being like this. Arkansas State brought back, a lot of good players and all conference players. Troy did. Georgia Southern did. Marshall has a few. Like, there's a reason. Like there's multiple teams in the top 100 in there, and on the women's side, the Sun Belt is the 6th ranked conference in net. Which, the men's side, like, they've been aiming to try to get to the top 10, like, let alone be 6th, the best mid major, and they haven't been able to do that. They've actually slipped a little bit. They're 20th this year, so that's a huge difference in what you're playing against week in, week out for JMU this season too. Like, that Arkansas State team is a really good team with a similar makeup to what you have, similar confidence level in what they're doing and everything. And, they're facing that multiple times during conference play.
Yeah, I think it is really interesting, like you said, bringing up the rankings of the conference and the men's Sun Belt side slipping down to 20th and the women holding strong at 6. And people always, I feel like it's been conversations over the last couple of years when the men, it was the story of, 2 years ago when when they make March Madness, it was, hey, they have to win the conference. Like they're not getting an at-large bid. And then, there's that fan discussion of, has JMU outgrown the conference? Does JMU need to look for another conference or X, Y, and Z? But when you look flip side to women's basketball, they fit in. It's a great mid-major conference and it's where they kind of need to be and how they can play and everything. It just fits in the Sun Belt. And the men's side, yeah, it definitely doesn't help that obviously this year the men's team is not talking about an at-large bid into the NCAA tournament with how they've performed, but it's one of those things that the Sun Belt as a men's side is an interesting one to just kind of watch and see how it struggles to kind of keep pace with some of the other conferences.
Yeah, and that's a good way to shift gears to the men's side because Preston Spradlin had a lot to say about a lot of these things during his press conference on Monday, which led into another loss Wednesday night against Louisiana, a team that struggled a lot in the non-conference. JMU was shorthanded in that one, but Louisiana's shorthanded too at this point in the season. So to see them lose that one on a shot with 1.2 seconds left was a very disappointing result, and another in kind of a string of disappointing results. Even when you think they sort of got turned around, they go to Troy and get a really good win on the road against Troy, and then don't play very well at Southern Miss, don't play very well at home against Louisiana, drop 2 in a row. Games that you really could have won if you're a JMU men, especially if they had been full strength. And then maybe you're talking about a turnaround at this point. But now, the mood around the program seems to be a lot different. Even just, Christian Brown, Kosei Egbule were the ones who came for the post-game press conference on Wednesday. Not the typical players who come back and talk to us. And I don't know if it was because they don't usually come back or and not the ones we hear from a lot, or just that it was a different game. But, they were mad and they showed that they were mad and upset and not happy. Where, typically where you get Justin McBride and people like that coming back, they at least try to kind of cover up whether or not there's any frustration. And there was really no covering it up from them and Preston Spradlin on Wednesday.
Yeah, it's interesting watching the men's team this year with some of these results. Like Wednesday night was a game that they could have and should have won. And I almost think back to this team kind of being similar to what happened with the baseball program last year. And Marlon Eikenberry said it to me a lot, where they had so many of those close games that luck or something would come in at the last second. And, they went from 2024 where it seemed like the luck was all on their side. And if it was a bad bounce, it went JMU's way, to last season. It was like there would be a luck play and it would go against them. And it was what kind of started off stacking up losses against JMU. That almost feels like the case for this men's basketball program right now, where, I'm not saying that a shot with a second left is luck, but that's something that sorry, sneezing. That is something that last year, maybe, or 2 years ago, maybe it swings in JMU's way and it bounces off the rim, it doesn't go in. And then now it seems like just kind of all of these random small things are stacking up and really kind of hindering what the men's program has wanted to do this year in terms of wins.
Yeah, and the injuries are definitely making a difference. I don't know if it's necessarily an excuse, especially in the Louisiana game. Like I said, they've got, a dynamic recruit that wasn't playing in that game and things like that. So it goes both ways. But, you look at who was on the court for JMU on Wednesday night, and there's no Justin McBride, no Ike Cornish, no Paul Lewis. I mean, I think if you'd asked Preston Spradlin in November, he'd probably think all the 3 of those guys are starting for this team right now, and none of them were available. So I think, it does definitely make a difference, but, you're also seeing just the continued inconsistency. It's a team that can play really well for a game, or they can play really well for 25 minutes of one game and then look really bad at other times. And they look bad just enough to lose a lot of games this year. And it's a little bit confounding. I don't necessarily think anybody's checked out at this point. Like I said, the players that we talked to on Wednesday were not happy. They were angry, upset. It wasn't at least those two guys were not checked out, but you got to wonder how long you can keep that mentality as things kind of start to slip away from you here in the late season.
You almost need to foster the anger and make it. And it's kind of interesting. I talked with Lauren Laporte last week, and she said you never want your team to play angry, but at some point when you look at this men's basketball team, maybe you want them to play a little bit angry and keep it where that emotion is still coming out, because like you said, it then keeps you locked into the game. Obviously, if it's the first week of the season, I don't know if you necessarily tell your team to go in and play angry, because that doesn't seem like a good point of view when you can foul out of a game. But I think at this point, if you see any sort of emotion, I think it, like you said, it does show that they're still bought in on the season, and they're not, checking out and looking toward next year, looking toward, are they going to enter the transfer portal? Are they going to come back? So it's one of those things that at some point, maybe you do want to capitalize on that fresh emotion just to keep it kind of pushing the game forward.
Yeah. And we are kind of at that point where, you start talking about the transfer portal already. I mean, even, Spradlin in his press conference, he joked about it. Like we were talking about, transfer stuff and building a roster and things like that. And he's like, hey guys, it's only February. But then he was like, yeah, I know this is how things work now. And, he talked about doing things differently this off season. I know, some people will think, oh, well, season's not going well. Now you got to clean house and rebuild all over again. I don't think that's going to be the strategy this offseason from hearing from Preston Spradlin. And especially he recognizes teams like Troy and Marshall and stuff have had some success bringing back players. So I think they will try to retain a certain group of players and spend the money to try to retain those guys. Not everybody on this team will be coming back, but I think, they will probably make a pretty strong effort to get guys like Christian Brown, Preston Fowler, Justin McBride, who knows what his market's going to be like, after putting up big stats this year. But, Eddie Ricks, if somebody like Cliff Davis ends up getting another year because of all the things in the courts where JUCO guys could possibly have another year, I could see them wanting to bring him back. I really do think they're going to want to have 4 or 5, maybe 6 guys from this team back next year to try to build off of. Ike Cornish, if he gets a medical waiver, is somebody I'm sure they'd love to have back. So it'll be interesting off season, and the season's not over yet, and they can still turn around and make a run here late. But we are at the point where we kind of start talking about the off season, because that's just how things work.
Yeah, and it kind of circles back to what we talked about with the women's team, that yes, the results haven't been there this year for the men, but if you do get that good group of players coming back, even if it is the same group of players that didn't necessarily produce well and produce the wins this year, just having that comfortability around one another and knowing the system and knowing, Spradlin and how he coaches and how he wants to run the program, that can lead to wins the more and more you spend around these guys.
Yeah, and talking about the difference between the men's and the women's too, it's almost like there's a little bit of an opposite thing too, because the women, we're talking about bringing back all conference players at this point. They brought back Peyton McDaniel as a player of the year. Arkansas State brings back all conference players. Troy brought back all conference players. JMU next year, I'm sure Bree Robinson will probably get some sort of all conference honors. They really want to bring her back next year, and that's something they can do. And Shauna Regan has said, I can bring back the player of the year in the Sun Belt and keep her here. I couldn't really necessarily go out and get the player of the year in the Conference USA to come here, because, that player is going to have offers everywhere. So even the retention is a different level of things, because Spradlin's talking about, look at Troy. They didn't keep the conference player of the year. He went to Indiana, but they kept 6 or 7 guys who can contribute. And now they probably have this year's conference player of the year too, is a guy who didn't put up big numbers last year, and Thomas Dowd. But he's put up huge numbers this year because he came back. And so on the men's side, they're not looking like, oh gosh, I really hope we can keep the conference player of the year or this really star player. I don't think they ever had like a lot of hopes of keeping a Bryce Lindsey last year, but they want to keep some guys who maybe average 7 points a game and hope that they average 15 next year.
Yeah, it will be an interesting one to see how Spradlin and his staff attack this postseason. And like you said, I know there are probably some listeners that aren't ready to talk about the postseason, but it is very much a real looming deadline almost, and the portal will open up, and some of these guys will have opportunities to enter it if they want to. So it is going to be an interesting one to watch, just to see how many, if any, of these guys Spradlin can convince to buy in and come back for another year.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest too, this was another thing Spradlin talked about on Monday, is that it does start now. His assistant coaches get calls from agents right now about guys who maybe think they're going to hit the portal, and it's not the players doing it, it's their agents reaching out to coaches at this point in the season. And the calendar with it now is the portal opens during the Final Four, I believe. And he was talking about that. That gives you like basically a whole month where, other than the 4 teams that are playing in the Final Four, or the teams that make the Sweet 16 or whatever, just a few teams out of the 360 some Division I teams, for a whole month, those players, they can't really go out and recruit new players according to the rules. And they're sitting there wondering which of their guys are bailing, or what the agents are doing with their players. And so he said it's going to be a really tough March because, unless you're making a deep run in the NCAA tournament, you're kind of just sitting around twiddling your thumbs while all the players and everybody else are getting ready to make their moves. And so it's like I said, we're talking off season in February, but the off season really has kind of already begun.
Yeah, I don't envy being a college coach. I know there's like those jokes, right around the end of the football season where everybody was like, man, I'd love to be a fired college football coach, which that, yes, maybe would be nice to be a fired college football coach with your payout at a school. That would be great. But to hear things like that, I don't envy kind of being in that position where so much of your career and job relies on making sure you're getting the transfer portal correct and making sure you're finding the right guys, but you have a whole month there where you're just kind of sitting and waiting and trying to piece together who's going to be available. It is not an easy thing, and obviously the transfer portal seems like it changes every single year in terms of rules and regulations. So it's one of those things where those coaches, they need to be on top of it, and it's probably not a fun thing to try to be on top of.
Yeah, and somebody whose off season really never ends is the football coach Billy Napier. Like we hinted at earlier, he has his signing day press conference to announce 61. Was it 61?
Yeah.
61 signees, and we really thought that was done. I mean, we thought they've got 4 new quarterbacks, or no, not 4 new quarterbacks, but 4 scholarship quarterbacks plus Blake Kendall on the roster, who he mentioned during his press conference. We weren't even sure if he was back, but he mentioned him. So they've got 4 quarterbacks that we thought was going to be a real open 4 quarterback competition. We thought it was all over, and then turn around the next day and JMU's flipping a commit from Nebraska, and a quarterback at that. 2 flipped commits here recently too from Big 10, Big 12 schools. Which it's a brand new day in college athletics. We talked about the kind of the negative side of it on the men's basketball end of it. I don't know if this is the college football playoff effect, if this is the revenue sharing effect, a little bit of both for JMU, but we talked a lot just during the whole recruiting period, transfer period, about the offers people were getting from Power 5 schools and JMU. But this last couple, that it really, I think, raised some eyebrows.
Yeah, you flip a really, really good young wide receiver who was committed to Colorado, flip him now, he's coming to JMU, he's signed, he's coming. And then you get a quarterback who's originally from Las Vegas and committed to Nebraska, and he's coming here. And it's funny too because Napier, when he addressed the crowd at the men's basketball game, I did go back and watch. He says 62 players, and I think it was one of those when he said it that night, I was like, "What?" It was like one of those that I registered a little bit, but at the same time, I was stopping writing a lacrosse season preview to film and listen to Napier speak. That it was one of those things I had read and seen so many numbers in the last 12 hours that it was one of those I'm like, that doesn't sound right. And obviously it was right, just not what I had heard earlier in the day with 61.
Yeah.
But it's interesting too because Jacob LaFrance said earlier in the day when we talked with him that they have a 300-mile radius of recruitment that they are going to attack heavy. Like they are going to leave, I think his exact words were they were going to leave no stone unturned in that 300-mile radius. But he did say that there are some positions that you need to go national on and that you need to look at other places. Quarterback is one of those. So I don't know if maybe that was a little bit of a hint of what was possibly coming later in the day with the flip, but it's one of those that Las Vegas to Harrisonburg, it's a long travel day, but it's one of those that obviously the coaching staff is looking to attack for because they want that young talent. Las Vegas has some good high school football too, so it's an exciting one for JMU, but it's just even in the last couple of days to see what this coaching staff has been able to bring in is pretty exciting. I mean, you even look to earlier in the week with Micah Matthews, the local kid coming back to Harrisonburg, and he was someone who was not recruited by JMU before Bob Chesney got here. And that's not a dig at the former coaching staff of Kurt Signetti, but they weren't looking locally. That's not how Signetti really wanted to recruit. He wasn't big on local recruiting. So you had Micah Matthews right down the road at Turner Ashby, who was a star baseball player, star football player, and he was getting looks from JMU baseball, but he was not getting the looks from JMU football. And that offer didn't come until Bob Chesney and his staff got into town. Ultimately goes to Tech, stays there for a year. And he, as he said, he's home. And it's one of those that makes that wide receiver room, one, get very much deeper, like we said, with the Colorado flip, but makes it a lot better too.
Yeah. And, they talked about this at the press conference too, but it is sort of interesting now to watch kind of the stages of the transfer portal, where, I think early on people were really commenting like, oh, they're getting so many like D2, D3 guys. Is that good? Is that bad? And it was really just because that portal opens up earlier. And they do like those guys. They they talked about wanting people who have produced at the level they were at, which can be D2, B3, FCS, G5, whatever. But as Catie deals with her cat, like if you're not watching the video stream, you're probably wondering what we're chuckling about. But cat tail all over the place.
It's back.
But to get back into it,
she's laying down now, right in front of me.
Yeah,
So
yeah, and I heard dog growling on my end earlier too. So it's pets all around. But yeah, to get back to it, it's like stages of the transfer portal because those non-Division I guys are available earlier in December. And Jimmy got like a good group of them. And then it was okay, now that the Division I portal's open and it's a lot of the G4 or G6 players, a few Power 4 players looking maybe for more playing time or whatever, but not too many of those. Mike Matthews, you mentioned, is one of the few. Moving from a Power 4 school to JMU. They got a lot of group of 6 players during that period. But now we're kind of seeing like the post-signing day thing where like to flip the recruits and everything. And these players who were highly, highly recruited players, high school players, now choosing JMU. And I don't know if it's because, hey, there's playing time possibility at a young age. There may be more money at a young age as opposed to other programs maybe putting their money in their veterans. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's definitely striking to see multiple times in a week that graphic from the recruiting services come up, flipped recruit from historically Power program to JMU. that really, I think, caught some eyes.
I really think it's kind of a combination of everything. Like you said, is it the college football playoff berth? Yeah, that probably plays into it. I think the fact that JMU hired Billy Napier, who has SEC experience, I think that played into it. I think Indiana winning a national championship where you had multiple former JMU players make an impact in that game, whether it's Aiden Fisher, D'Angelo Pons, Mikal Kamara. I think people, like high school recruits especially, they see that, and if they're young, they know that, like, obviously, I don't think they're going into their college career already thinking about transferring, but I think there is at least something, maybe even subconsciously, where they're now, JMU has been national news and gotten so much national attention over the last couple of months with the college football playoff and with Indiana winning it all. I think that just kind of helps. And I've talked with a few different players, I talked with a few different people. Napier kind of touched on it. LaFrance touched on it, but I talked with Zach Greenberg the other day about the gap in talent between the group of six and, even all the way down to Division III. And Zach Greenberg is someone who started at the Division III level. And he said that the gap is not, it's probably as small as it's ever been. And it's not that big of a gap between these. And Napier mentioned it on Wednesday, where a lot of it is still kind of the trickle down effects of COVID, and everything is kind of diversified talent wise. Obviously P4 teams are going to have the best starters most of the time. But once it comes to having depth, it really does spread out around college football. So I think it's one of those things that people in high school recruits are seeing it now, where JMU is a good opportunity to get playing time and make national headlines and get some attention on their name.
Yeah. And, like you said, they talked about it at the press conference the other day, that, we are still seeing that, like that the number of players who got fifth, sixth, sometimes seventh years in college football means that some players who would have been Division I recruits coming out of high school or G5 recruits coming out of high school or whatever are ending up at the at the FCS level or the D2 level or even the D3 level or going JUCO. And there are more of those players available at those levels that can come in and contribute right away than ever before. And I don't know if that's going to be a permanent thing. I don't know if 10 years from now we're going to still see a lot of D3 to D1 transfers. But we might, because who knows what the eligibility rules are going to be going forward with everything happening in the courts and the NCAA and everything. So, yeah, it used to be, okay, we like this kid, but he needs to put on 30 pounds. He can do it here for 2 years, and then we'll see if he can play. Now it's like he's going to go to D3 and get in the weight room there, and then maybe make the jump up. So it's just a lot different than maybe what people who've been fans for a long time are used to when it comes to recruiting.
And Napier even said it on Wednesday about some of those X factors. Like, you can get bigger in the weight room, you can't get taller. And so Napier said it where he's like, 6'9" is 6'9". Like they are a tall guy. And he's talking about, the guy that DJ Fox, who they got out of, the Division III ranks and national champion up in Wisconsin. So there are some of those X factors that, I think Napier and his staff have been able to look into and find that, you can't teach, you can't build. Like, your height is your height pretty much. And I did appreciate his joke of building and signing the Great Wall of Shenandoah, because that he said on Wednesday, because that's kind of what it's looking like. But this is a group right now where they went out and they found guys that fit their system, and they found them at every level. And, obviously there hasn't been a ton of, guys that have jumped up, but at JMU, at least in terms of like Division III up to the FCS and then into the FBS, like there hasn't been a ton of those. But you look at a guy like Zach Greenberg, he was the starting center and he played well throughout the season.
Yeah. Before we go, let's just hit a little bit on spring sports beginning. Looks like if weather holds up, like they're planning to play some lacrosse this afternoon at Centera Park, up the hill. If you're going out to brave it, don't go to the bleachers. It's up the hill on the turf field. But a big game against North Carolina. It's always a big opener for lacrosse. Softball's right around the corner. I know you've talked to people from both of those teams. Just quickly, your outlook kind of on where spring sports are going this year.
It's actually really interesting with lacrosse and softball. Both Lauren Laporte and Shelly Clays talked about their teams in a similar light, where both think that their teams this year have gotten a lot closer and have gelled together a lot quicker than they did last year. Lauren Laporte said it took time last year for that softball team to come together, and everybody kind of remembers the slow start that they had before ultimately ending up in the Sun Belt Championship Series. But she said it's been interesting with even, I think it's like 6 new freshmen and 4 new transfers. Even with all of those new players, she said this team has come together just so much faster than she was expecting. And Shelly Clay said the same thing about the lacrosse team. She gave a lot of praise to the 5 seniors that have stuck around and didn't transfer out. And she said that they have really done a good job of kind of setting the standard of what the program needs to look like. And she thinks that this team right now is more ready for this UNC game than this group was last year. She has been very impressed with kind of, how they can play together, how they take care of each other on the field. And it's going to look a little different. Obviously, you don't have a Maddie Epke in the draw circle or on the attack anymore. She transferred to Northwestern and she's going to have her time there. But, Shelly Clays did talk about the fact that this year that they're trying to be more of a team group this season and not rely heavily on one player in one certain aspect, which ended up, it hurt them a little bit in the NCAA tournament last year. Their strength all year had been draw controls. It was Maddie Epke off the draw every single time almost. And then in that NCAA tournament, it did not go well. Duke was dominant in the draw circle. So now Shelly Clays has said that they're looking to make sure that, they're not losing what they're good at, but they're also relying on multiple other people. And it's going to be a team that has a lot of new faces stepping up.
Yeah, the ladies get started here this week with spring sports. Baseball comes a little bit later, so I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about there in the coming weeks. But in the meantime, you've been listening to Purple and Bold podcasts from Daily News Record, DNR Media. Search DNR Media on wherever you catch your podcasts or on YouTube. Search, like, to subscribe, all that stuff. And thanks for tuning in.